Hello, I'm Jason Angelette.
And I'm Dr. Mario Sacasa. Welcome to Faith in Marriage today.
Again, we have a very important show for today. Last show we had Dr. Tom Neal in the Seeds of Faith segment, and he said that God made us to be saints. He went on to say that what that means is that we're called to live and love in the way that God lives and loves. The understanding behind this comes out of the fact that we were made in the image and likeness of God, a God who is love. The two greatest desires of the human heart is to love and to be loved. And when we don't live in the love that we were called to, or experience love in the relationships that we are in, then it strikes the very core of who we are and can cause some of the greatest pain. Unfortunately, it can also be a reason why people resort to unhealthy relationships, unhealthy things to find relief from that pain. And this can be the recipe which breeds addiction and furthers the pain for themselves and then passes it on to the people around them. Johann Halley, a British journalist who experienced a lot of pain himself from family members who were abusing drugs, said that the opposite of addiction is not really sobriety but more connection. So much in the area of recovery can come from restoring and rebuilding healthy relationships. Today, Dr. Mario and I will discuss how we can at times stumble in our connections with one another and how we should be intentional in strengthening those bonds in ways that we can foster healthy connections with God, our spouse, our children, our families, and our friends. But first, Dr. Mario is going to sit down with Deacon Louie Bauer, chaplain at the Fontainebleau Treatment Center, Alcohol Drug Unit, and the director of the Substance Addiction Ministry, also known as SAM, in Slidell, to talk about the growing crisis of addiction and ways those afflicted or affected by substance can find help. The Willwoods community invites married couples to break away from their busy schedules and spend quality time rejuvenating and enriching your relationship on a weekend married couples retreat. Held at the beautiful St. Joseph Abbey in Covington, you and your spouse will spend time growing closer in your marriage through inspiring talks, private couple time, personal alone time, reconciliation, Eucharistic adoration, and the celebration of the Mass. To register for your getaway, go to faithinmarriage.org.
We are back, and I'm with Deacon Louie Bauer. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. How are you doing today?
Pardon?
Doing all right?
Doing great.
Fantastic. Okay, so first question. You work with the Substance Addiction Ministry up there in Slidell. So tell us a little bit about what SAM does.
The Substance Addiction Ministry started back in 2011 when I realized that even though I didn't have an addiction myself, I saw how many people were suffering, how many families were being destroyed. As a deacon, part of the role of the deacon from the early church is that we took care of widows and orphans. And I thought about how many widows and orphans addiction has caused. And the person may still be alive, but the families are still widows and orphans because that real person is not present because addiction has stolen their life away. So I saw the need to address that, to be there for not just the families, but the people who are suffering from the addiction, to let them know that there's help, there's hope, there's healing, there's support, but something has to be done. Change has to take place.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for your ministry and dedicating so much time to it. So when we talk about addictions, what is the biggest obstacle for people reaching out for help?
I think shame. Shame is the big obstacle. No one wakes up one day and says, I want to become an addict or an alcoholic. It happens over time, and it happens without their knowing it. Sometimes people will turn to it, but there's usually reasons behind their first use. There is a decision that the person makes, there's no doubt about it, but after the addiction kicks in, there is no decision taking place inside the brain. The brain has to get what it needs to survive, and like you and I need to breathe in and breathe out, we need air. That's how they feel, I need this to survive, and it will do anything, that brain will do anything to convince the person that what I need to do to get the drugs is okay.
So when that tolerance kicks in and the person is seeking more of the substance to give them the same high, but recognizing that a lot of that is in secret, I think is kind of what you're saying here.
Yeah.
So the shame, the cross that person carries is really the biggest obstacle for them acknowledging that they need help. Is that it?
Right. And I think it goes back a long ways. It goes back generations because When I was growing up, you hear of someone who had an alcoholic in the family. We just don't talk about that. What happens in the family stays in the family. So we even distance ourselves from that family member. And we will lie for the person, and we say, no, he's ill right now, he's sick, he's not doing well, or the reason we don't go over there is because he's always busy, not knowing that Uncle so-and-so was an alcoholic or an addict, and at the time they didn't know how to treat it like they do today. They've discovered so much over just the last 15, 20 years. It's incredible, and the shame stops the person from talking about their disease to anyone else. But even just identifying themselves that I have a problem is huge. Even in the face of negative effects, losing their job and getting in an accident and going to jail for a DWI, they still don't think they have a problem. Yeah. And sometimes, most of the time, they usually have to hit a bottom. Yeah. It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, but I've heard that's the classic definition of an addiction, right? The inability to stop said behavior despite negative consequences.
Exactly.
So despite DWIs, all these other things, family leaving, inability to still stop that. Now, we've talked about the individual, but for the family, obviously that's very difficult to see a loved one just going down this path of self-destruction. What advice or counsel or encouragement would you offer to family members who have somebody who has an addiction?
For the family members, it's the common saying out there is that if there's an addict or an alcoholic in the family, the whole family needs to be treated. You've come in contact with it. And you have to treat it in a different way, but in a very similar way. You cannot fix the person. And I think that's the difficult part is we as parents, when we have a child, everything that we do is geared toward raising that child. So I've taught this child how to feed himself, how to ride his bike. I taught him how to drive and balance a checkbook. Everything he does is because of me. And I've taught him all these things. He does this because I'm a part of his life. And so when something happens to that child and he becomes an addict or alcoholic, the parents somehow, this is my fault. Where did I go wrong? Maybe if I'd have just sent him to Catholic school when he was young, he wouldn't have turned out like this. If he wouldn't have played with Billy and Jimmy when he was growing up, he wouldn't have turned out like this. Maybe if I didn't have to work when he was growing up and I'd have stayed home with him, he wouldn't have turned out like this. This is my fault. And so they take the shame, they take the guilt of something they shouldn't take. The best thing for them to do, most of the phone calls I get is from the loved ones, from the parents or the spouses. And the first thing they ask me is, he's got a problem, she has a problem, what do I do? The first question I ask them is, and that's where everything goes from that answer, do they want help? If they want help, man, we got resources, we got help, we got support. If they don't think they have a problem or they don't want to go get help at the time, I said, you need to help yourself. You need to survive this. You need to find a way to cope with this. And that's what Al-Anon is about for alcoholics. Nar-Anon is about for narcotics parents and spouses. So they have to get the help themselves. The way I look at it is it's like you're on a cruise ship. Your whole family's on this cruise ship. And all of a sudden, your son jumps over the side. It's like, why did he do this? What caused him to do this? We can't figure out why he jumped off this cruise ship. So we throw him a life ring, and he's trying to swim and trying to stay above water, and he's pushing to the side. We throw him a raft. He's trying to swim. He pushes the raft to the side. He's going to drown. So what do? We jump in after him. And then we're trying to save him. And we find out we can't. We're going under. He's climbing on top of us so he can breathe. There comes a point in time when that parent or spouse has to say, I can't do this anymore. I need to get back on the ship. I need to save myself if I have any chance of helping him or her. And I think that's a
hard line. I mean, you're on it. You're absolutely on it, because you said sometimes we want to come up with simple solutions. It's one thing, if I only did X or if I only did Y, and trying to come to a simple answer, when sometimes it isn't a simple answer. I mean, it's a whole host of reasons of why somebody kind of goes down this path. Right. But as you're saying, finding the balance, finding boundaries to not lose yourself in the midst of it, which again can be very difficult, but that's where the resources you spoke about are very helpful for individuals. Yeah?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there for both the person who's addicted as well as the affected family members. When I started the substance addiction ministry in Slidell in 2011, I had asked the question, I asked my pastor if I could preach all the masses on a particular weekend. It happened to be Divine Mercy Sunday when the gospel was the apostles were locked in the upper room because of fear. And that's what happens. We lock ourselves. We self-imprison ourselves because I can't tell other people about my fear, my guilt, my shame. But Jesus knew where they were. He brings the Holy Spirit in, and life changes as we know it. And so that weekend, I introduced it to the parish, and I preached at all 5 masses that weekend to let everybody know. And I asked the question in the middle of my homily. I said, I need to ask you a question. How many people here, by a show of hands, have either been afflicted with or affected by alcohol or drugs in your family? To raise your hand. I said, you can't lie, you're in church. And as I looked out, I'm looking at 80% of the people with their hands up. And people looking at each other and say, I'm not alone. And I think that's what people feel, that I'm going through this. Nobody else understands what I'm going through. Nobody else feels the pain I'm feeling. Nobody else can know what this is about. And it's so false. And that's what happens. We try to fix it on our own with no information, no understanding of addiction. So we keep trying and failing. And what it does, it separates the family. Right. Because what addiction does, it separates the person who has the addiction from who they really are, who God created them to be. It separates themselves from their family, and it separates themselves from God. And sometimes it's just hard to make those connections. So they need help. They need a way to get back in. At bottom is usually what has to take place for them to find that. But it's difficult, it's hard, but it's doable. Yeah. People's lives are being lost every day at an enormous rate.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. We only have like a minute left in our interview here. But thinking about parents who have younger kids, 8, 9, 10 years old. I mean, I grew up where we did the DARE program. And my parents didn't really talk much about addiction because it was discussed in school. Briefly, 1 or 2 bits that you would encourage parents to talk to their kids about in preparation for these.
I think every parent should warn their children, not just to not take drugs, but this is the reason. If there is alcoholic or an addict in the family, in their genetic forefathers or whatever, to let the children know you have that thing inside of you that may come out if you drink or if you use drugs. So if they have that genetic makeup, their parents were addicts or alcoholics, it would be a very smart idea to teach them early, 9, 10, 11 years old. This is what you have. You can't take a chance with this, with your friends or anything. So when they break their arm, when they fall off the swing set, the parents need to talk to the doctor. Listen, they have a father or they have a mother that's an addict or an alcoholic. I would like them to not have any kind of painkillers, no narcotics, if possible. And if so, when they go home, to not have narcotic medicine. That only works for like 3 to 5 days, and after that, they shouldn't be taking opiates to try to relieve pain.
Right. Well, Deacon Louie, God bless you. Thank you so much for being here and joining us in the conversation. We'd love to have you again sometime soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
Welcome back to Faith in Marriage Today. In an effort to encourage your understanding of the Catholic faith, we have a brief reflection offered by Dr. Tom Neal. Seeds of Faith is a reoccurring segment done in collaboration with the Catholic Community Foundation. Today, Dr. Neal addresses the question, can holiness grow in marriage and parenting? Take a look.
first of all, the essence of holiness, if it's love, is being other-centered, is focusing your life on the needs of others. And the beautiful thing about marriage and family life is it's built by design for love. In other words, it only works well when you live like that toward your spouse and your children. So, I mean, the 1,000 things that confront you every day in trying to love your spouse, for me to love my wife every day, to be patient with all of the things that come up every day in our lives, to be, truthful and honest, to put her first, or for my children and trying to raise them and educate them to be good, virtuous, people who are capable of living not only as good citizens, but as good Christians. All of the demands that are involved in that every day call me out of myself. I love to, an example I often use, my grandfather wrote me a letter one time on parenting and on marriage, another letter. But in the parenting one, he said, when you have your first son, my son Michael, before he was born, he wrote a letter. When you have your first son and people tell you, Tom, you become a father when your child is born. He said, don't believe them. You don't become a father when your child is born. He said, your children rip fatherhood out of you. They tear it out of you every day, with every cry, with every smile, with every success, with every tragedy. They will call you to come out of yourself toward them, to live for them, for their good, for their welfare. It will always be available to you every day, this vocation. In a sense, your child is your vocation. Your spouse is your vocation. They call you out of yourself, which is the voice of God. To do what? To love. And everything else that's entailed in that. So this is where I think marriage and family life is an example of where holiness really becomes a powerful possibility.
Well, we're back. Dr. Mario, great conversation with Deacon Bauer, and obviously Dr.
Thanks,
Tom Neal knocked it out the park again. Just the idea that we can do this, the challenges that are placed before us, that we have the opportunity to grow in holiness, and that we can do this in our family. And let's go back to our conversation with connection. The importance. What does this mean for us as families in the society, and how important, right?
Well, so Dr. Tom Neal asked a very important question. I think a lot of people, overlook, which is, can I be holy as a married person?
Right.
And in my work with vocations in seminaries and in marriage preparation, a lot of people tend to ask that question, can I be a holy person? Can I pursue sanctity as a married person? And the answer, of course, is absolutely yes. Yeah. And so I think bringing this together, one of the ways that kind of looks for us as family members is that we have to be attentive to building those bonds of intimacy with our spouses and with our children. And we have to be very sensitive and intentional with that. And if we're not, then I think that's one way that we're failing to actually live the call, the vocation of married life.
The temptation I think people have is that, if I didn't have all these things around me, if I wasn't so busy with work and if it wasn't so demanding at the house, I could be such a holy person, just be off in the monastery, just saying my prayers and being one with God. And it's like, no, God didn't call you to that. God called you to be a husband. He called you to be a father. And it's going to be through that, through the challenges and the difficulties and the sleepless nights and the changing of the diapers and the fixing the dishwasher again. It's going to be all of that. That's your path. That's your call to holiness, is through that embrace of those challenges in those moments.
Yeah. So in an interview that I did with Dr. Jennifer Miller on my podcast, Always Hope. And
great podcast, by the way.
Well, thanks, man. We'll plug that out. Please check it out, Always Hope podcast. You can find it anywhere. But the recent interview I did with her on Catholic feminism, we were talking about the male-female dynamic and the difference between the two. And the word that was used in the Old Testament for female was actually akin to savior. Yeah. So helpmate isn't enough, the word savior. And as we were having this conversation, we kind of came up with a definition, at least for me, that made sense, which is that salvation is making up for that which we lack. Yeah. And so thinking about that in these moments when we're tying to technology and at times, feeling alone in the room, and we turn to YouTube or we turn to Instagram to kind of fill a need, are we looking for technology to save us in those moments? Yeah. All right? Are we looking for technology to make up for that which we are lacking? And if that's the case, then we're looking for intimacy in a digital space that it really can't do that, right? Technology cannot save us in that way. It cannot make up for that longing that we have. And we need to be, again, back to this point, very intentional about what it is that we're feeling when we turn to the phone, and is that pulling us away from real intimacy in relationship with that?
No, you're right. I mean, we can see studies will show how much people have used screen time, so that the number of hours per day for an adult is somewhere like around 11, and the average number of hours for, I think, for a child is between 7 hours a day. So 7 hours that children, 11 hours that are adults are on phones, and these numbers have been rising. These hours, this time has been rising, and you look at even the number of like apps on your phone. Like in 2016, the Apple Store had over 2.2 million apps that you could download on your phone. All these gadgets and technology and games and things that we can play. I mean, look at the various ways that we can access entertainment and media and social media and things like that. It is pulling our attention, our focus, our important call to be present to one another. And I think that's it, because whether it's like thinking that I'm going to need to escape and go to some solitude place, which you might need a getaway, and that's fine. A personal retreat is always a good thing.
Right.
But that's not where God is calling you to be the whole rest of your marriage. And at the same time, when I'm at the house, if I'm going to my digital web, my outlet or my phone or whatever like that to kind of escape or kind of just take away my time, then I'm missing out on an opportunity. And I'm hurting the relationships that are around me. And I see it. I mean, I think we've seen some things happen before where relationships in families where the kid is asking the mom to put away the phone. And then they're asking for that attention.
Right, yeah. And some of the problem with the devices now is that we do everything on them. So, you're talking about 11 hours. I mean, our computer's up right now while we're filming. We're looking at monitors, while we're recording. So this all counts in terms of work and productivity. We need these devices in front of us. But even our cell phones, for example, I mean, you think about all the things that single device does. Music. I actually use it to call people. I text people. I connect through social media on it. But even things like I want to get healthy, so all of my fitness trackers through my watch is connected to the apps on my phone. My calorie counting apps I do on that. So I mean,
your alarm clock, your calendar, your GPS,
and it goes on and on. So everything that I want to do in the day, rather than having 15 devices, it all comes to that. And so it is hard because you have to be mindful and restricting of yourself, as you're doing all these.
It's like in
things.
Las Vegas, right? You go to. I've never been. Actually, flew into Las Vegas, but what I hear, they have all these lights,
this is what
right?
People tell you, right?
This is what people tell me. So all these lights. The whole thing is they're grabbing your attention. Like, come into this place, come into that place, go see this show, go to this place. And I mean, you don't need to go to Vegas. You go anywhere, really big cities. You see all these lights. You go online, see TV commercials. Everything is trying to grab your attention. You got to do this. Got to come here. And again, the point I think is that it's not that we're trying to, like, let's say, pull the plug and just get rid of this thing, but it's about making sure there's a healthy balance. And I think going back to what you said about our spouses, like the word helpmate is not to help you do the dishes. It's about this work in salvation, this call to holiness. And so sometimes we might need to ask our spouse to help us. I think it would be really great to ask our spouse to help us more often, especially in the areas of holiness, to say, babe, help me get away from this. If you see me, do you think this is a problem? And I think maybe even more just having times where there's just times where you just close the computer, you turn off your phone, and you just be present. When the work day is done, you're no longer at work, be home. Check that email later. And sometimes maybe we don't have the luxury of being completely unplugged because of maybe a career. You might call you because you're a doctor and you're on call or whatnot, but you can at least limit as many other types of distractions as possible that can grab your attention away from this intimacy, which I think is really important for us to save these relationships, because I think we're losing them when it comes to all the stuff that's happening in our day.
That's right. And I'm not that type of doctor, by the way. So.
It's great.
All right, so what's our takeaway for today's episode?
Well, I think what you and Deacon Bauer had talked about earlier. I mean, if someone is struggling with addiction, where do we go? And I think that what he talked about was a great opportunity for us to, the SAMS ministry is a great ministry. The Archdiocese of New Orleans has some great resources available. I think the key thing is that, checking your area and find out what's happening, what's going on, but to know you're not alone, and to try to isolate this and try to run this on, to try to fix this problem on your own is an unhealthy scenario. No one else that is successful at anything got there because they did it alone. Everybody had help. I always go back to, football season's coming up soon, and Drew Brees. I mean, how many coaches, how many assistants does this man have to help him do what he does? And so thank God that he does, because he performs so well.
That's right.
I guess in an analogous way, we need to kind of look at this and find out if we're struggling in this area, in any area of addiction, or whatever the case may be. If we're struggling, it is not a sign of weakness to ask for help.
Yeah, so with that then, if inside of you realize there's some disconnection that's happening maybe between your spouse or your kids, a first place to even begin is to actually ask, how connected are you to God?
Yes.
And what are things that you can do to reestablish that connection? Well, simple things. Turning the radio off when you're driving, not listening to the podcast, no matter how good it is. Having some time of silence, recommitting yourself to prayer every night, committing yourself to a yearly retreat, maybe going to Mass a little more frequently throughout the week, and supporting one another's prayer lives, going to confession together, doing an hour of adoration together. But that's might be even the first place to begin, is asking yourself, how connected am I to the Lord?
Yeah, and the other one, I would say, if you're married, I would obviously say, how well are you connected with your spouse? Like, how much time do you spend each day in meaningful conversations? I know sometimes things can be difficult with that, but that's a good question. So how are date nights? Something that we recommend doing at least once a week is going on a date night with your spouse. And sometimes, we can get into going on a thing where there's multiple couples and there's maybe an event or a movie or a wedding or like that, but there's not a lot of this intimate conversations that my wife and I are able to have. So that can't be counted, I think, as a date night. We need to have, and it doesn't have to necessarily be because we got in the car and went somewhere fancy. It could be the porch, the front porch. It could be the wherever, the dining room once the kids are down, with a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, but some place that we can go regularly to find that opportunity to connect with each other, and for kids.
That's awesome, man. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or learn more about the work of Faith in Marriage at faithinmarriage.org. Also, if you have a question for us or a comment, please go ahead and leave them. We would absolutely love to hear from you and answer any questions on future episodes.
We look forward to being with you again next time. Until then, thanks for watching. God bless. Love your family. Live your faith.